In the peaceful village of Camboro, where the wind whispered through tall trees and children played near the rivers, lived a kind woman named Malai and her only daughter, Sefina. Their life was simple, sometimes hard, but filled with love and peace. After the death of Malai's husband, the mother and daughter held each other close, finding comfort in their quiet bond. But everything changed the day Gadon entered their lives. Gadon came from a nearby village, tall and strong with sharp eyes that looked deep and dark, like a storm about to pour. He had a charming smile and smooth words that easily fooled everyone. He promised to care for Malai, to protect her and her daughter, and to bring new joy into their home. The villagers were happy for Malai. They sang songs, danced, and blessed the new union. On the outside, it looked like a fresh beginning for the small family, but no one knew the monster hiding behind Gadon's charming face. As soon as the door closed and the visitors were gone, Gadon's smile disappeared. His hands, once soft in greeting, turned into fists. His voice, once calm and sweet, became loud and terrifying. He didn't like noise in the house, especially not from Sefina. He hated the way she laughed, the way she sang, the way she simply existed. He called her useless, a burden, a shadow that didn't belong, and that was just the beginning. At first it was angry words, then it turned into sharp slaps. Soon the beatings became part of her daily life. Over tiny things, water spilled by mistake, a plate broken accidentally, or sometimes for no reason at all, Gadon found a way to take out his anger on her small, fragile body. Malai tried to speak up, but every time she did, Gadon's rage would fall on her too. She wanted to protect her daughter, but fear held her back. She told herself things would change, that Gadon would soften, but deep down, she knew the truth. He was a man whose heart had turned to stone. Sefina, though just a young girl, carried pain that no child should ever bear. She never screamed, never cried out loud. She simply stayed silent. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was strength in disguise. While others saw a quiet, broken girl, inside her was a fire growing, a strength rising. She kept all her tears to herself and all her pain in her heart. But one day, the world would hear the storm her silence was building. Behind the walls of their hut, Sefina's life turned into a silent prison. Every beat, every insult, every cruel word from Gadon added to her suffering. Yet, she didn't fight back. She endured it quietly. But silence can be powerful. And little did Gadon know that the very silence he mocked, the quiet strength he ignored, would one day rise so loud that even the gods would hear it. One day, that silence would destroy his pride and echo through the village like a roar. Sefina was only 14 when her world turned dark. A gentle soul, with a heart full of dreams, she found peace in the simple joys of life, humming songs beneath the mango tree, dancing in the rain, and helping her mother with chores around the house. She was respectful, kind, and full of quiet beauty that warmed the hearts of those who knew her. But to Gadon, her stepfather, she was nothing but a thorn in his side. From the very beginning, Gadon made it clear he didn't want her around. He mocked her voice, calling it the cry of useless birds. Every time she sang, his eyes would darken and his anger would rise. He hated her laughter. He hated her silence even more. To him, Sefina was a burden, an unwanted shadow in his home. It started with scoldings, sharp words filled with bitterness. Then came the slaps, quick and cruel. Before long, the beatings became part of her daily life, for small mistakes, for things she never did, for things that didn't even matter. Sefina became the punching bag for every ounce of Gadon's rage. A spilled cup of water, a misplaced broom, a crack on a clay pot. No reason was too small. Each strike left a mark, not just on her skin, but on her soul. Yet she never screamed, never cried in front of him. Her lips remained sealed, her eyes filled with quiet strength. Her silence became her only protection, her only power. She refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. Malai tried to help her daughter. She would step in sometimes, shielding her child with trembling hands. But Gadon's fury was merciless. Whenever she spoke up, he turned his wrath on her too. The fear in Malai's eyes grew with every passing day. She loved her daughter deeply, but she was trapped in a storm she couldn't escape. Her heart broke each time she saw her daughter hurt, but her fear kept her voice locked inside. For Sefina, the house that was once filled with laughter and warmth became a silent prison, a place where pain lived in every corner and hope was buried under fear. But even in that darkness, she held on to something deep inside, something Gadon could never reach. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was strength. It was fire wrapped in calm. Every day she endured, every tear she swallowed, was a seed of strength growing quietly inside her. While the world saw a girl who said nothing, who accepted pain without a word, no one realized that she was building something powerful, something unshakable. Her silence wasn't surrender, it was preparation. Because sometimes the quietest storms are the ones that hit the hardest. And Sefina's silence was not just survival, it was the beginning of a story that would shake the very ground her stepfather walked on. After one of the worst beatings she had ever received, Sefina could no longer hold the pain inside. Her body ached, her heart felt heavy, and her spirit seemed broken. With trembling legs and bruised arms, she slowly walked away from the house, away from the shouting, away from the pain, away from the eyes that never saw her tears. She didn't know where she was going, but her feet led her deep into the Namola forest, a place many feared, but she had always found strangely comforting. The forest was silent, peaceful, untouched by the cruelty of the world. Tall trees stretched high into the sky, and a soft breeze danced through the leaves. There, beneath a towering baobab tree, Sefina finally let her tears fall. She sat quietly, her head resting on her knees, and for the first time in a long while, she didn't hold her pain in. And then, without even realizing it, she began to sing. Her voice came out soft at first, fragile, like the whisper of a broken heart, but it grew stronger with every note, pouring out all the pain she had hidden for years. Her song was full of sorrow, but also beauty, a haunting melody that carried through the trees like a sacred prayer. The birds stopped singing, the wind slowed down, the whole forest seemed to pause, listening to the voice of a girl whose soul was speaking louder than words ever could. What Sefina didn't know was that someone else was listening too. Bamuto, an old herbalist and spiritual healer who lived in a hidden hut deep within the forest, had heard the voice. He had lived among the trees for many years, healing the sick and guiding lost souls. But never before had he heard a sound so powerful, so pure, so filled with pain and strength at the same time. He followed the sound quietly, guided by the melody like a thread pulling at his heart. When he reached the baobab tree, he stood quietly in the shadows, listening until the last note faded into the air. Then he stepped forward, his footsteps gentle on the forest floor. "Child," he said softly, his voice deep and wise, "your voice carries the weight of spirits." Startled, Sefina jumped to her feet, wiping her tears quickly. She didn't know who he was or what he wanted. Fear flashed in her eyes, but Bamuto simply smiled, a kind smile full of warmth and understanding. "Don't be afraid," he said, his eyes kind. "Your voice, it holds power far beyond what you understand. It speaks not just to people, but to the wind, the earth, and the spirits that dwell in silence. You have a gift, child, a gift wrapped in pain, but shining with purpose." Sefina stood there quietly, unsure of what to say. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. No one had ever seen her pain as anything more than a burden. But this old man saw something else, something greater. And in that moment, for the first time, Sefina felt something stir deep within her, hope. Back at home, life became even darker for Sefina. Gadon's cruelty grew sharper with each passing day. One afternoon, he accused her of something she didn't do, stealing fish from his calabash. He didn't ask questions. He didn't listen. He simply grabbed his belt and struck her again and again until her skin opened and her blood stained the ground. Malai wept in a corner, trembling with fear, unable to stop the madness. Her heart broke seeing her daughter in pain, but she was too weak, too afraid to fight back. Her silence was no longer protection, it was helplessness. That night, Sefina could barely walk, but her feet still carried her to the only place that brought her peace, the Namola forest. Every step hurt, but she didn't stop. Her body was bruised, but her spirit was still alive. She reached the great baobab tree and collapsed beneath it, her eyes swollen, her heart heavy. The cool wind touched her face, and the leaves above whispered gently, as if comforting her. Through her pain, she began to sing again. Her voice, though soft and trembling, flowed like a stream of sorrow. It was no longer just a song. It was her medicine. The pain in her body found a voice. The sadness in her heart found a melody. Her voice carried her wounds, her struggles, her quiet strength, and once again, the forest listened. Bamuto appeared, just like before, his eyes filled with concern as he saw the marks on her arms and the pain in her eyes. He didn't ask questions. He simply knelt beside her and brought out his herbs. Gently, he cleaned her wounds, applied healing leaves, and whispered soft prayers to soothe her soul. "Come here whenever your heart hurts," he told her kindly. "The forest will always welcome you, and I will always help you heal." Sefina nodded silently, tears rolling down her cheeks, not just from pain, but from the comfort in his voice. For the first time, someone saw her suffering and didn't turn away. Someone cared. From that night forward, the baobab tree became her refuge. Every time Gadon's fists or belt left new bruises, Sefina escaped to the forest. The trees became her friends. The wind became her comfort. The ground beneath her became her listener. And her songs, full of pain, full of courage, became her way of staying alive. She never complained. She never screamed. But something inside her was changing. With every visit to the forest, with every word from Bamuto, with every song she sang beneath the sky, she was healing. Not just her body, but her spirit. She was growing stronger in her silence, wiser in her suffering. The girl who had once been afraid to speak was slowly becoming a woman whose voice carried hidden power. A power that no beating could silence. A power that no cruelty could break. And though no one in the village saw it yet, the forest knew. The trees knew. The wind knew. Sefina was no longer just a broken girl hiding in the shadows. She was becoming something more, something unshakable. The time for Cambero's biggest celebration had arrived, the Festival of Voices. It was the most awaited event of the year, where music, culture, and tradition came alive. People from far and near gathered in colourful attires, bringing their best singers, dancers, and drummers. This year, excitement was even greater because Prince Ramalai of the Zindoro Kingdom would be attending. He wasn't coming just to watch. He was searching for a cultural ambassador, someone whose voice could represent the soul of the land across many kingdoms. Gadon, swollen with pride, wanted to use this opportunity to shine. He forced Malai to rehearse a song, believing she could impress the prince. But Malai's voice, once soft and graceful, had grown weak with time. No matter how hard she tried, her tone cracked and faded. Gadon grew frustrated and angry, but he was too blinded by ego to consider anyone else, not even the quiet girl in his own home. Meanwhile, deep in the Namola forest, Sefina continued to sing beneath the baobab tree. Her voice had grown stronger with each visit. She no longer sang only for comfort. She sang with purpose. The trees had become her audience, and the wind her choir. Bamuto often watched from afar, amazed by how her voice had transformed. It was no longer just a melody. It was emotion, memory, healing. It carried pain and strength in every note. A day before the festival, one of the main performers from Camboro fell ill. Panic spread among the village elders. Who would sing now? Who could represent them before royalty? In the middle of the chaos, Bamuto stepped forward quietly. He leaned toward the elders and whispered, "Let the girl from the forest sing." At first they hesitated. "Who is this girl?" they asked. "Is she trained? Will she be good enough?" But they had no other choice. So, reluctantly, they agreed. On the day of the festival, the village square overflowed with people. The air was filled with the rhythm of drums and the scent of roasted maize. Then came the moment everyone waited for, the performance that would determine who would be chosen by Prince Ramalai himself. When Sefina walked onto the stage, the crowd gasped in surprise. Murmurs rippled across the audience. "Isn't that Gadon's stepdaughter? What is she doing here? She's never spoken, let alone sung." Even Gadon sat in disbelief, his face stiff with confusion and rising anger. But before anyone could speak, Sefina raised her head, closed her eyes, and began to sing. And in that moment, the world stood still. Her voice flowed like a river of emotion, powerful, smooth, unforgettable. Every note carried stories, pain, and beauty that touched even the coldest hearts. People forgot who she was or where she came from. They only heard the sound that wrapped around their souls. Even Prince Ramalai leaned forward, eyes wide, lips parted in amazement. When Sefina finished, there was silence, and then thunderous applause. The crowd roared. Some wept. Others stared, stunned. No one had ever heard anything like it. Before Gadon could react, before he could storm the stage in rage, Sefina had disappeared into the crowd. But Prince Ramalai had already sent his guards to find her. The girl, who had once been silenced in her own home, had just shaken the entire village, with nothing but her voice. When the news of Sefina's performance spread through the village, reaching Gadon's ears, his pride was shattered into pieces. People were whispering in admiration, not about him or Malai, but about the very girl he had beaten, mocked, and tried to silence. He couldn't bear it. His anger exploded like a wildfire. The idea that the child he had tried to erase from existence was now the voice of the village was too much for his wounded ego. That night, he stormed into the house like a mad beast. Without a word, he grabbed Sefina and began to beat her harder than ever before. His fists landed like thunder. His shouts echoed through the walls. Malai tried to stop him, screaming and crying, but he shoved her to the ground so hard that she hit her head and passed out. The chaos was unbearable. With blood dripping from her face and bruises across her body, Sefina tried to crawl away, but Gadon wasn't done. He dragged her by the arm to the courtyard and screamed in front of the neighbors, "You are no daughter of mine. You brought shame to this house. Leave, get out and never come back." The villagers watched in silence. Some pitied her, some turned their heads. No one dared stop him. With nothing but torn clothes and a broken heart, Sefina stumbled into the darkness. She didn't cry. She didn't look back. Her steps were shaky, but her soul was already leaving behind the life of pain she once knew. She ran to the only place that had ever offered her peace, the Namola forest. There, beneath the same baobab tree where her voice had first found life, she collapsed. But this time she wasn't alone. Bamuto came rushing to her side. He wrapped her in a warm cloth, cleaned her wounds, and whispered, "You don't belong in a house of hate. You belong among those who see your light." That night, Bamuto didn't just offer her shelter. He offered her purpose. "You are not just a girl anymore," he told her gently. "You are a healer. You are a voice the spirits listen to. You are a storm rising from silence." From that moment on, Sefina became his apprentice. She wasn't just healing from her wounds, she was discovering her true strength. Bamuto taught her the sacred arts of healing with herbs, the chants that called peace into troubled hearts, and the wisdom passed down from generations. She learned how to treat pain, not just with medicine, but with music. Her songs became her tools. Her voice now carried healing power, not just sorrow. And slowly, the bruises faded from her skin. But what grew stronger was her spirit. She walked taller, she sang louder, she smiled more often. The girl who once hid in silence was now learning to command the winds, to speak to the soul of the earth, and to carry the weight of her destiny. Sefina was no longer a broken child. She was becoming something far greater. She was rising. Years passed quietly, but they were not empty. In the heart of the Namola forest, under the shade of the sacred baobab tree, Sefina transformed. She was no longer the scared, bruised girl who once ran there for safety. She was now Sefina of the Baobab Shrine, a name whispered with reverence across the region. People from distant villages journeyed through rivers, hills, and dusty paths just to find her, not just for healing herbs, but for her songs. Songs that touched the deepest parts of the soul. Her voice had changed. It was no longer soaked in pain. It carried peace, wisdom, and warmth. Mothers brought sick children. Warriors with battle wounds came limping. Women with broken hearts came crying. And somehow, after hearing Sefina sing or feeling her gentle hands prepare herbal mixtures, they left healed, not just in body, but in spirit too. And yet, Sefina never took a single coin. Her service was a gift born from suffering, shaped by silence, and now shared with the world. Her shrine became a place of peace and reflection. Even birds seemed to sing softer near her. The air around her felt different, calm, blessed. But beyond the trees and hills, in the royal palace of Zindoro, Prince Ramalai had not forgotten the mysterious girl with the golden voice. Her song from the Festival of Voices still echoed in his mind. He had searched for her after the festival, but she had disappeared like a whisper in the wind. Now, hearing the stories of a forest healer with a magical voice, he knew it had to be her. He sent messengers, he sent gifts, he sent invitations with gold and silk. But Bamuto, wise as ever, only smiled and said, She will come when her time is right. And Sefina, sitting beside the baobab one evening, felt the pull of something deeper, not toward fame or riches, but toward something unfinished. She looked up at the sky, her fingers brushing the earth gently. I don't seek the palace for luxury, she said softly. I seek it for closure. My story must return to where it paused. Bamuto nodded. He saw it in her eyes. She was no longer running from pain. She was walking toward destiny. And so, Sefina stood at the edge of the forest one morning, dressed not in gold, but in a simple woven robe, her hair wrapped in white cloth, her eyes calm, and her heart full of quiet strength. She was not going to impress anyone. She was going to complete a chapter of her life that had once been stolen by pain. The world had once beaten her into silence. Now, it was silence that had shaped her into a woman of power. Her journey was no longer about healing herself. It was about healing others and confronting her past with dignity, not revenge. And this time, it was the world that was not ready for the storm she had become. When Sefina returned to Kamboro, the entire village stood still. Eyes widened, mouths dropped. The same girl they once saw limping through the streets, bruised and quiet, now walked with the grace of a goddess. Her steps were calm but powerful, her presence so commanding that even the wind seemed to pause when she passed. She wore a flowing robe made from forest-woven fabric, simple yet majestic. Her hair was wrapped in white silk, and her eyes carried the calmness of rivers and the depth of storms. Women whispered her name with admiration. Children ran after her, their little feet following her shadow. Even the strongest men who once turned blind eyes to her pain now lowered their gazes in respect. Sefina didn't speak much, but when she did, her words were wise and soothing, like a mother's lullaby and a healer's chant. Without making noise or seeking attention, she opened a healing center just at the edge of the village. It wasn't a palace, but a humble space with clay walls, wooden stools, and the scent of herbs floating in the air. People came in pain and left in peace. Sefina didn't just give herbs, she gave hope. She taught young girls how to mix roots, how to chant for healing, how to listen to the earth. She turned her pain into purpose and made her voice a gift for others. The village elders honored her. Women sang her praise. Even neighboring villages sent people to learn from her. But in the shadows of all this glory stood a broken figure, Gadon. He was no longer the proud, roaring man. His shoulders slouched. His beard was overgrown and messy. He reeked of old palm wine, and his eyes carried shame instead of fire. After Malai left him, tired of his cruelty and drunkenness, he had lost everything. The same villagers who once praised him now looked away. His hands, once used for hurting, now trembled as he begged for coins. One day, unable to hold back his guilt, Gadon approached Sefina. He stood before her healing center, eyes wet, lips shaking. He mumbled something, perhaps an apology, perhaps just regret, but Sefina said nothing. She simply looked at him with calm, silent eyes, then turned and walked away. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need revenge. Her silence, full of power and peace, was louder than any scream. It pierced Gadon deeper than any wound he had ever given her. In that moment, he realized the truth. The girl he tried to break had become a woman the whole world now honored. His pride, his ego, his cruelty, none of it remained. But her silence? That stayed with him forever. And the villagers watched, realizing that true strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it walks away with its head held high and lets karma do the rest. The ceremony of new moons was the most awaited day in Kamboro, a sacred celebration where the village honored growth, renewal, and the strength of spirit. On this day, everyone gathered in the village square. Drums echoed through the air, dancers swirled in colorful cloth, and the elders sat proudly in a circle of honor. But this time, there was a special moment that everyone was waiting for, Sefina's recognition. She walked into the square slowly, gracefully, with her white robe flowing behind her like wind over water. Her face glowed with calm strength, and even the birds seemed to pause to watch her. The villagers stood in silence as Elder Narambe, the wisest and most respected chief, rose to speak. He looked at the crowd, then at Sefina, and raised her hand high. His voice, deep and steady, echoed across the square. From pain, She rose. From silence, she spoke louder than war drums. She is our pride. She is our strength. She is our future. The crowd erupted in applause. Women ululated. Children jumped with joy. Men beat their chests in pride. Some cried, remembering the broken girl they once ignored. Now, she stood tall like a mountain, unshaken by the storms of her past. Then, Sefina stepped forward. The crowd went quiet again. Everyone leaned in, waiting to hear what this powerful woman would say. She looked at them, her eyes calm but fierce, and said in a steady voice, "To every girl who suffers in silence, know this, silence is not weakness. It is a seed, and when it blooms, it shakes the world." And with that, she stepped down from the stage. No long speeches, no bitterness, no mention of her pain or her abuser. Just one message, simple, powerful, unforgettable. She didn't even glance at Gadon. He stood at the edge of the crowd, looking smaller than ever. His eyes were heavy with regret. But Sefina's silence was louder than any scream he had ever heard. That silence wrapped around him like chains he could never escape from. It was his judgment, his punishment, his eternal reminder that he had tried to destroy a girl who rose to become a symbol of strength. The villagers didn't even look at him anymore. Their eyes were on Sefina. Their hearts were with her. She had spoken for every girl who was beaten, for every woman who cried in secret, for every soul that thought silence meant defeat. She had turned that silence into a storm of change. From that day forward, Sefina's words were etched into the hearts of everyone. Mothers told their daughters, elders told their grandchildren, and every time a girl in Kamboro felt weak, she remembered Sefina's voice and knew she was not alone. And Gadon, he remained a shadow in the village he once ruled with fear. No one feared him anymore. No one listened to him. He had become nothing. But Sefina had become everything. As the years passed, the name Sefina echoed far beyond the borders of Kamboro. Her voice, once silenced by pain, had now become a beacon of hope for thousands. People from distant lands travelled just to hear her sing, not only for entertainment, but for healing, peace, and spiritual strength. Her songs carried stories of sorrow, strength, survival, and healing. They touched hearts in ways no words ever could. Royal families began to invite her to sing at coronations, weddings, and peace gatherings. Her presence brought calm. Her melodies brought unity. Whenever there was conflict between villages, Sefina was called, not as a warrior, but as a healer of hearts. Her voice became a language of peace. Even elders bowed their heads when she sang, and children sat quietly, mesmerized by her voice that sounded like the earth whispering its secrets. One day, news came from the Zindoro kingdom. Prince Ramalai's mother had fallen gravely ill. Traditional healers had tried everything, but nothing worked. The prince remembered the girl with the voice that once stopped time. He sent messengers to the Baobab shrine, not with royal demands, but with humble requests. He begged for Sefina to come. When Sefina arrived at the palace, the queen was weak and pale. But Sefina didn't panic. She simply held her hand, prepared her healing herbs, and began to sing. Her voice filled the royal chambers, soft yet strong, gentle yet powerful. As she sang, the queen's breathing calmed, her pain lessened, her eyes slowly opened, and she smiled for the first time in days. The prince was overwhelmed with gratitude. He knelt before Sefina and offered her bags of gold, jewels, and fine clothes. But Sefina only smiled and shook her head. "I sing not for crowns or coins," she said. "I sing for those who suffer in silence, for those who carry pain they cannot speak." That one sentence touched everyone in the palace. Even the servants wiped tears from their eyes. The queen held Sefina's hand and whispered, "Bless you, child. You are not just a singer. You are a healer of souls." Back in Kamboro, the stories spread like fire. People sang her name with respect. Her story became a legend told around village fires. Mothers told their daughters, "Be like Sefina, gentle but powerful, soft but unshakable." And what about Gadon? He died a lonely man. No one mourned him. No one honored him. Even Malay had long left him behind. He spent his final days in regret and silence, haunted by the very silence he once thought was weakness. But in truth, it was the silence that crushed him. Sefina never lifted a finger against him, yet her silence destroyed his pride more than any punishment ever could. Sefina didn't need revenge. Her success, her peace, and her legacy were enough. She lived with dignity, served her people with love, and left behind a story that would be told for generations. She proved to the world that pain could become power, and silence could speak louder than any scream. Her stepfather beat her every day, but her silence beat his pride forever. If this story touched your heart, if Sefina's journey reminded you of someone who's silently fighting their battle, then don't let her voice be forgotten. There are many like her, quiet souls who endure pain behind closed doors, waiting for a moment of light, of hope, of healing. Let this story be a voice for them. Sometimes silence speaks louder than screams. And just like Sefina, you too can turn pain into power, scars into strength, and tears into healing songs. So, if you believe in the power of resilience, if you believe that no pain should go unheard, then help us spread this message. Please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories like this. Your support keeps these voices alive. Your one click could bring strength to someone's silence. Thank you for watching. Stay kind, stay strong, and remember, every silent heart has a powerful story to tell.